Hello, everyone. She was the French beauty who could stop time with a single glance. Her face was delicate yet unforgettable, the kind that made designers fight for her and photographers chase her across continents. Aurelie Claudel did not need theatrics. She carried the quiet power of a painting come to life. And when she appeared on the page of Vogue or under the lights of a Versace runway, she looked as if she had always belonged there. But in an industry that burns through beauty as fast as it discovers it, Aurelie's rise came with whispers about her choices, her sudden absences, and the mystery of why someone at the height of success would simply fade from view. This is the story of a model who had it all and walked away without looking back. Aurelie Claudel was born on August 4th of 1980 in the small town of Laxou in northeastern France. It was not a place known for producing supermodels far from the bright lights of Paris, Milan, or New York. Her childhood was grounded in the rhythms of a close-knit French family, surrounded by the charm of provincial life, but far removed from the intensity of the fashion capitals she would one day command. From an early age, Aurelie stood out, not because she sought attention, but because her beauty seemed otherworldly. She had luminous skin, a refined bone structure, and an elegance beyond her years. Teachers and neighbors noticed, often commenting that she looked like she belonged in a painting. Yet for Aurelie, childhood was about school, friendships, and a quiet curiosity about the world, not fame. Her upbringing was traditional. Family meals were sacred, and values like humility, respect, and hard work were non-negotiable. She grew up speaking French, surrounded by a culture that revered style but valued subtlety over showmanship. Her parents encouraged her to focus on her studies and to think carefully about her future, never pushing her toward modeling, even when others began to suggest it. As a teenager, she possessed a natural poise that made her seem older than her years. She did not wear much makeup, preferring a natural look, and her style was understated. But in photographs, even casual snapshots, something changed. Her eyes carried a depth that was magnetic, and her expressions had the quiet drama of a seasoned model without any formal training. It was during these years that her potential began to attract real attention. Friends and acquaintances urged her to consider modeling, but Aurelie hesitated. She had heard stories of the industry glamorous on the surface, but unforgiving beneath. Still, the idea lingered in the back of her mind. The turning point came when a talent scout visiting from Paris happened to see her while she was out with friends. Struck by her natural elegance, the scout approached her with an offer to visit the city and meet with an agency. For a girl from Laxou, it was both thrilling and daunting. Her parents were cautious, insisting that she finish her schooling before making any big decisions. What they did not know then was that this moment would be the first step toward a career that would take Aurelie far beyond the quiet streets of her hometown, into the heart of the global fashion industry. Aurelie Claudel's entry into modeling was not a calculated pursuit. It unfolded like a series of accidents that could only be called fate. After that first encounter with the Paris talent scout, she was invited to visit the capital during a school holiday. She arrived in the city with modest expectations, carrying only a few simple outfits and the polite shyness of a small-town girl. Paris was overwhelming: the wide boulevards, the energy, the sense that every street corner held a secret. The agency meeting was brief. They did not need long to see what she could bring to the table. Her portfolio at the time was non-existent, just a few candid photos taken by friends. Yet even in those raw images, her presence was undeniable. She was signed almost immediately. Her first real test came in the form of a casting for a small editorial in French Elle. The shoot paired her with a seasoned photographer who immediately recognized her potential. Aurelie needed little direction. She understood instinctively how to use light angles and expression to tell a story. The editorial was a quiet success, and her face began to circulate within the Paris fashion network. Not long after, she was booked for her first major runway show. It was for a young avant-garde designer, and the atmosphere backstage was chaotic hairdryers buzzing, makeup brushes flying, assistants shouting instructions in multiple languages. Aurelie stood in the corner, calm but alert, absorbing everything. When her turn came, she stepped onto the runway with a poise that belied her inexperience. Her walk was fluid, unhurried, almost hypnotic. Photographers snapped furiously, and by the end of the night, several more casting directors had taken notice. Her breakthrough moment came the following season. When she was booked for Chanel, walking for Karl Lagerfeld was a rite of passage in the modeling world, and Aurelie approached it with both nerves and determination. The setting was extravagant, the gowns opulent, but what stood out most was how naturally she seemed to belong there. Lagerfeld himself complimented her after the show, noting her quiet strength and timeless beauty. That endorsement would open doors far beyond Paris. Soon, international calls began to come in. She was flown to New York for shoots with Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and LUS. Photographers like Mario Testino and Peter Lindbergh loved working with her, praising her ability to shift from high glamour to stripped-down minimalism in a single frame. She was versatile, but never generic, a rare quality in a world full of beautiful faces. Her rise was not without challenges. The pace was grueling, the travel endless, and the competition fierce. But Aurelie navigated it with the same elegance she brought to the runway. She avoided the drama that often surrounded young models, keeping her personal life private and her professional demeanor impeccable. By the late 1990s, she was no longer just a promising newcomer, she was a name. Booking campaigns for brands like Ralph Lauren, Valentino, and Victoria's Secret, she became both a high-fashion muse and a commercial favorite. It was a delicate balance few could maintain, but Aurelie managed it with ease. Still, even at the height of her early fame, there was a sense that she was holding something back, as if she knew that beauty could be both a gift and a trap, and she was determined not to lose herself in it. By the early 2000s, Aurelie Claudel had become one of the most sought-after faces in fashion, a model who could move seamlessly between the ethereal world of haute couture and the commercial powerhouses that define global beauty. Her runway calendar was relentless. In Paris, she glided for Dior, Chanel, and Yves Saint Laurent in Milan. She brought a subtle sensuality to Versace and the refined elegance that Valentino adored. In New York, she became a familiar presence at Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, and Michael Kors, her presence lending an effortless sophistication that seemed impossible to manufacture. But it was in front of the camera that Aurelie's star truly burned brightest. Photographers adored her because she was not simply a model. She was a storyteller. In the studio, she could shift from a romantic, soft-focused muse in flowing silk to a sharp head fake, a modern figure in stark black and white. Mario Testino once remarked that she had the rare ability to look like a classic beauty and a modern icon in the same shot. Her image graced the covers of Vogue in multiple countries, as well as Harper's Bazaar, Elle, and Marie Claire. Beauty brands sought her out for her fresh, luminous look, leading to contracts with L'Oreal, Revlon, and Victoria's Secret. She became the face of Ralph Lauren's romance fragrance, her campaign exuding a kind of timeless intimacy that resonated deeply with audiences. Even at the height of her visibility, Aurelie maintained a certain air of mystery. While many of her peers embraced the celebrity culture of the time, she avoided the paparazzi traps and gossip columns. She rarely gave interviews, and when she did, her answers were thoughtful but reserved. This selective presence only added to her allure, making her appear untouchable, a model who belonged to the rare realm of icons rather than trends. Her peak years also saw collaborations with fashion legends. Working with Peter Lindbergh, she embraced stripped-back, almost raw portraiture that revealed her without artifice. With Herb Ritz, she embodied golden sunlit sensuality. With Stephen Maisel, She became an editorial chameleon, morphing into characters that blurred the line between reality and fantasy. Yet, perhaps her greatest strength during this period was her ability to endure in an industry obsessed with the next big thing. While others burned out after a few seasons, Aurelie adapted without ever compromising her essence. She could be romantic one season, minimalist the next, yet always recognizably herself. By the time she entered her mid-20s, Aurelie Claudel was no longer just a French beauty making waves abroad. She was a global figure whose name commanded respect. She had secured her place not only in fashion's current conversation, but also in its history. In an era when supermodels were often expected to project a loud, highly visible persona, Aurelie Claudel chose the opposite path, and that is precisely what made her unforgettable. She resisted the urge to conform to the industry's unwritten rules of self-promotion. She did not chase the tabloids, manufacture scandals, or use shock value to keep her name in circulation. Instead, she let her work speak, and it spoke loudly. Designers and photographers valued her precisely because she remained an enigma, focusing on the craft rather than the spectacle. One of the most remarkable aspects of Aurelie's career was her refusal to be boxed into a single identity. She could embody the refined grace of old Hollywood in one campaign, then appear as a stripped-down, almost bare-faced muse for a minimalist brand the next. Unlike models who were typecast into either high fashion or commercial work, she moved freely between the two without diluting her image. Her choices also defied the prevailing beauty narrative of the late 1990s and early 2000s. At a time when the heroine chic look was dominating, Aurelie brought a healthier, luminous alternative glowing skin, athletic elegance, and an approachable sensuality. She did not chase the extreme thinness that was often demanded, and she was vocal, albeit quietly, about the pressures placed on young women in modeling. She also demonstrated an unusual independence in managing her career. Rather than locking herself into long-term exclusivity with one brand, she kept her portfolio diverse, ensuring that her image did not become overexposed. She would occasionally step away from the industry entirely for months at a time, choosing to travel or focus on her personal life, even when it meant turning down high-profile jobs. These absences were risky in such a competitive field. But Aurelie always returned, and each comeback felt like an event. Her presence on set was another point of distinction. Colleagues often described her as calm, collaborative, and deeply professional, with none of the diva tendencies that plagued certain stars. Photographers noted that she listened more than she spoke, absorbing direction and then transforming it into something unexpected. Perhaps most importantly, Aurelie embodied a kind of timelessness that the industry rarely allows. While many of her contemporaries were replaced by younger faces within a few years, she aged into her career gracefully, proving that beauty did not have an expiration date. In doing so, she quietly challenged the industry's obsession with youth, showing that maturity could be just as magnetic as innocence. In the end, her greatest act of defiance was simple. She never let fashion dictate who she should be, and she never confused visibility with value. For someone who seemed to have mastered the art of balance in the chaotic world of fashion, Aurelie Claudel's gradual disappearance was as quiet as it was perplexing. There was no scandal splashed across headlines, no public fallout with designers or brands, just a slow fading from the spotlight. The first signs came in the mid-2000s, when her runway appearances became less frequent. Campaign bookings slowed, though she was still in demand for selective projects. Those who knew her say it was not a lack of work, but rather a conscious choice. The constant travel, the pressure to maintain a certain image, and the endless scrutiny had begun to take their toll. Aurelie valued her privacy more than the relentless exposure that came with superstardom. There were whispers within the industry. Some claimed she had grown weary of fashion's fickle nature. Others suggested she was pursuing love or family life away from the cameras. Unlike many of her peers, she did not use social media to maintain visibility. In an age when Instagram began to dictate careers, Aurelie's absence only deepened the mystery. For a period, she resurfaced in a few carefully chosen editorials and campaigns, showing that her beauty and presence had not faded. But these were rare, almost like postcards from another life. She seemed uninterested in chasing the new rules of the game, preferring to keep her legacy intact rather than dilute it with constant output. Some colleagues hinted at deeper reasons for her retreat. Modeling had given her a passport to the world, but it had also taken a personal toll long stretches away from loved ones. The pressure to be on at all times, and the unspoken reality that the industry could be both intoxicating and isolating. Aurelie, they said, was always self-aware enough to know when to step back. By the 2010s, she was living largely out of the public eye, occasionally appearing for nostalgic features on iconic models of the 90s and early 2000s. Each appearance reminded the fashion world of what it had lost, a presence that was more than beauty. A reminder of an era when models could remain mysterious and still command power. Her retreat was not framed as failure or defeat. If anything, it was a deliberate act of preservation. She had entered fashion on her own terms, thrived on her own terms, and left on her own terms. For an industry built on constant visibility, that kind of control was perhaps the rarest achievement of all. Aurelie Claudel's name may not dominate today's headlines, but in the memory of fashion, she remains a figure carved in light and shadow, a reminder that true elegance does not beg to be seen. It simply exists. Her legacy is not just in the covers she graced or the runway she conquered, but in the way she navigated an industry notorious for consuming its stars. She proved that a model could have a career built on restraint rather than exposure, on mystery rather than overexposure. For many young models, Aurelie's story offers an alternative blueprint, that longevity can be achieved without sacrificing selfhood, that you can choose when to be present and when to step away. She embodied a kind of freedom rarely afforded in fashion, the power to walk away at the peak and still remain unforgettable. When her images from the late 90s and early 2000s resurface, they carry a timeless quality, untouched by trends. Her gaze still holds that quiet power, the same one that captivated casting directors decades ago. Perhaps the real question is not why Aurelie Claudel left the spotlight, but how she managed to leave it without losing her place in history. In an industry that thrives on constant reinvention, she remains exactly as she was, a singular vision, untamed by time. And maybe that is the most enduring form of beauty.